Explain to us, first of all, the permanent fund and how important that is to Alaskans. As I understand it, individuals get payments every year from this fund.
Sure. So the permanent fund was established by Constitution in 1978, David, and the purpose of that fund was to save wealth that was being created by oil. This is the beginning of when we were pumping oil from the North Slope for future generations of Alaskans. So a fund was created. It was constitutionally protected, and as a result, that fund has grown to about $66 billion today. In 1981, the permanent fund dividend program was put into place to allow Alaskans who, under our Statehood Act, our agreement with the federal government and our Constitution, individual Alaskans cannot own the mineral wealth underneath their feet like they can in other states such as Texas or North Dakota. So as a result of that, the discussion ensued as to how we could share this wealth with Alaskans, and the permanent fund dividend came into place. So the budget issue this year is not really an issue between the permanent fund dividend and our fiscals. They're really separate, and I know at times there are folks that try and lump them together, but the permanent fund is its own corporation that invests in stocks and bonds and real estate, et cetera, and mostly outside of Alaska. The fiscal issues are a result of a dramatic drop in oil price and the fact that Alaska has lost production over the years. We used to produce about 2 million barrels per day in 1989, 1990. We're down to about 500,000 barrels a day today. However, there's been renewed interest in Alaska. We call it a renaissance in Alaska. And we have conventional oil plays in Alaska, unlike other places such as in Texas or North Dakota, which are shale plays. We have large pools of oil that are being discovered and are being not just explored, but developed at this point. And so we're looking at an additional 200,000 to 300,000 barrels over the next 7 years. The question is this: will we be able to get our fiscal house in order to be able to bridge this time between today and when this new oil comes online? And that's been the battle in Alaska, reducing the size of this budget so that we can support it.
So, Governor, you make a really important point here that may have been lost on some of us, which is this. You had line item vetoes on a lot of budget issues that were very unpopular, I think it's fair to say, with a lot of people in Alaska, and include things like the University of Alaska system and assistance for seniors and Medicaid and things like that. If you had not made those cuts, would it have affected the amount that people got paid from the permanent fund?
It would not. And the discussion amongst people in Alaska is, are we going to tie the permanent fund dividend to the budgetary issue? And that's kind of the discussion that's happening now. But there are statutes that have been in place for almost 40 years, David, that actually govern the disbursement of that PFD, as we call it, the permanent fund dividend. In other words, the statutes determine the amount of money that people get, not necessarily the current fiscal issue, although the last several years, the governor, previous governor, and then the legislature have not appropriated the full amount for this PFD. We were trying to get that straightened out because, again, it comes out of a whole different fund for the people of Alaska.
Okay, we're talking with Governor Mike Dunleavy of Alaska. So, Governor, give us a sense of the politics of this right now. As I understand it, the legislature could have overruled your vetoes, your line item vetoes, if they'd had the supermajority. They didn't have it. Where are the people of Alaska, do you believe, with respect to this recall effort?
Well, I personally think the majority of the people of Alaska are not going to support the recall. I believe the majority of Alaska, we were elected by 51% to 44 against our opponent here in November. But this recall effort is really, it's a tool for folks on the left for the most part, because they start to talk about a recall a mere 2.5 months into our election. They wanted to overturn or undo the election, David. And so I would say that the majority of Alaskans support the agenda that put us into office. And part of that agenda, once again, is to reduce the size of government so that we can make sure that we can support this government going forward. In October of last year, oil was about $85 a barrel. When we took office in December, it had dropped to $54 a barrel. We had little choice but to try and reduce the size of this budget so that we could close this deficit. We had about a $1.6 billion deficit. We've closed it by about by eliminating $650 million in spending, or about 40%. We still have more to do in the fiscal issues, but nonetheless, folks on the left that want to undo the election are using these vetoes to try and overturn this election.
Governor, as you say, energy is so terribly important to Alaska as a state and to the people of Alaska. Give us a sense with the Trump administration. When they came in, they said, we're going to have more drilling, we're going to have more oil production. Have they helped you keep the production up?
It's the Trump administration has been very helpful in supporting resource development in the state of Alaska, and not just oil, but mining as well, and hopefully in the near future a timber industry that we can stand up in Alaska. We do have 1/7 of the country's timber. We have a lot of resources, but going back to oil, it was under the Trump administration that ANWR was open for oil exploration. This is on the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge, the 1002 portion of it that was always held by Congress to have potential for being developed for oil. We now have the opportunity to sell leases up to the federal government does, and Alaska will partake in the oil that's found there, and so we're very helpful. We're very grateful, I should say, of the help that the Trump administration has given Alaska in this area.
So you've gotten the attention not just of Republicans, but also some Democrats, like Andrew Yang, who's running for president. He's gotten on the debate stage and said that he really thinks we should look to Alaska and your permanent fund, which is based on oil, to do something similar with technology in the lower 48. This is part of what he had to say.
The freedom dividend is very bipartisan. The state that's had a dividend for the last 39 years is a deep red Republican state, Alaska, which funds it with oil. And I'm going around the country saying that technology is the oil of the 21st century. And this policy, it's not left, it's not right, it's forward, and that's where we have to go.
Not left, not right, but actually forward. Do you agree with him?
What they refer to as basic income, universal income.
Yes, that's right.
The dividend is different. The dividend is different. Again, the reason we have a dividend is because the people of Alaska cannot own through the Statehood Act, our agreement with the federal government to become a state, and then through our Constitution, the people of Alaska cannot own the minerals underneath their feet. So the question was, how do the people of Alaska partake in these mineral riches, and how do the people of Alaska protect the permanent fund? Because again, if this fund was left unprotected without the people attached to it through a dividend program, there's no doubt that politicians would have found a way over the decades to access the money into that fund and degrade that fund. And so it's a little different than what Mr. Yang is talking about. This has been in place for almost 40 years, and it has to do with the fact that Alaskans cannot own the mineral rights underneath their feet.
Governor, as you say, when we talk about Alaska, we actually have to think about how it deals with energy, but also we have to think about how it deals with trade, because a lot of your GDP actually, it comes from trade. You may agree with the Trump administration what they've done on energy. What about on trade, in particular the USMCA?
Well, we're hopeful that when these trade agreements are finally ratified and the issues with the tariffs to China are finally settled, that it's going to be a boon not just to the United States but to Alaska. We're a resource-producing state, and not only that, but our position on the globe is critical to the world. We are at the Ted Stevens International Airport in Anchorage, Alaska. It is the second busiest cargo airport hub in the country and the 5th busiest in the entire world. A lot of trade goes through that international airport in Anchorage, Alaska. We have a lot of trade in seafood, for example, and again, if we were able to stand up our timber industry again, there'll be a lot of trade in timber as well as oil and potentially gas. So we are a resource-producing state. We're centrally located. We are the closest state in the United States to Asia. And we believe that if we get these trade issues dealt with, it's going to help not just the country, but Alaska as a whole, too.